And welcome to College Football Tradition, a history of American college football. This is the 1875 college football season that we're going to talk about today. I'm joined alongside Jacob Vanderford. I'm Brian Partika, and we are so excited to be halfway through that first century of college football. This is really when we start to see an influx of different schedules come through, an influx of more teams coming into the fold as well. And this season was really special because it's really the last time for a couple of years that we really see Yale have a down year. So we see Columbia have a good year, we see Princeton have a good year, and we see Harvard go off to a 4-0 season, a 4-0 campaign, if you will. So Jacob, what are some things that stood out to you for this season as an influx of different schedules started to appear?
1875. Here we go, folks. I think it's really interesting that Columbia has scheduled a lot of games this year. And yeah, obviously, they've won several of them, going 4-1-1 to finish the year. But yeah, I think the main reason why we see Columbia playing a lot of these games is because of that centrality to a lot of different cities, football teams within the area. As football started to grow as a sport in America, we saw teams like Harvard from the Boston area, Yale from Connecticut, Tufts, all these different places. They're able to come to New York City, to a place that is bustling, to a place that many people would be able to come see those games and things like that. So I think you're starting to see football become a little bit more popular in terms of audience, crowd, people coming to those games, the amount of games that are scheduled, and all of those things. We have obviously our recognized national champions for this year were Columbia, Harvard, and Princeton. And Columbia, obviously, we talked about went 4-1-1. Those key wins were over Stevens, 2-1, Yale 3-2. Like you talked about, or as we started the podcast today, Yale has a down year. In the previous years, starting back in 1869, as we've gone along, Yale has been playing extremely well. And then we see Princeton, obviously, and then the tie against Rutgers as well. Princeton went 2-0. Our unclaimed national championship resume from Harvard, 4-0. Those key wins against Tufts, against Yale, all of those things. And yeah, I think we kind of decided on Harvard and Princeton as our kind of national champions. I don't know if you want to debate on this at all, Brian, just based on what those records were, who they played, the amount of games played, all those different things. But I think the main point that I wanted to make, just as we open up the podcast today, was just that centrality piece of everything, how games are starting to be scheduled, how schedules are being made. We're seeing the evolution kind of from rugby, from soccer. We're starting to see some of these rules kind of progress into the football game that we know today.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll definitely, yeah, we'll definitely spar over a couple of these national champions and talk about these schedules soon too. This was also the first year of Yale versus Harvard. So we see this rivalry be played every year. It's the most famous of the Ivy League rivalries. I would argue that Yale and Princeton, just because of the history of that one, is a little bit more famous. But Yale versus Harvard, big, big Ivy League rivalry in today's world. It's also the first time we really get a look at Walter Camp. He is the father of American college football, and he is somebody who attended Yale. He was only 156 pounds. I mean, he was a small guy. So even by high school football standards in today's world, that is small. So he was getting looked at kind of like as a child, really. But he ended up being obviously a great player and an even better coach, and that's what he would end up being eventually across his entire career. So he was very influential in the sport. I'm curious on what you think between, as we look at the two undefeated teams this season, 4-0 Harvard and 2-0 Princeton. How do you compare those teams? And even if you want to throw in 4-1-1 Columbia into that mix, because I'm looking at Harvard, their 4-0 season, a win at the Canadian All-Stars in Montreal, a win at Tufts, so in the northern part of the country. They go to Yale and win. They win pretty convincingly, 4 to nothing, and then they host the Canada All-Stars again and win. So really, I'm looking at their schedule. I'm like, the Yale win is impressive, but is it as impressive as Princeton's 2-0 season? because they beat Columbia and Stevens, and Columbia is a team that beat Yale. So I look at who has the best win between Princeton and Harvard, and Princeton's win over Columbia to me is the most impressive of the 1875 season, just because Columbia played 6 games that year and only lost that one to Princeton.
Yeah, it depends on what you look at, I think, in terms of how many games you play, and also that strength of schedule piece. And that's still a dilemma that we're working through in college football today, I think,
Yeah.
as we're kind of deciding who gets into the playoff race, as we have expanded to from 4 teams to 12 teams. Now, thinking about 16 in the future and all those different things. So I think when you look at the strength of schedule piece, I think Princeton definitely played the harder teams, but I think Harvard overall, that the grind that the season presents, playing 4 games, playing that multitude of games. I think at this time, as they're trying to figure out all the different rules, the tackling part of things, the scoring part of things, there was a lot of endurance that had to be built throughout these seasons, and all of that. So I think for me, if I was going to choose, I'm going to pick Harvard just because of the amount of wins that they have. I'm not knocking Princeton based on their win over Columbia. That's a huge win. Stevens as well. But I just think based on the seasons that Yale has had previously, Harvard beating them 4-0, that's very convincing. Sort of a rout, you might say. And yeah, I'm just going to say Harvard because of the amount of games that they played.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a very fair statement to make for sure. I would like to share a little bit of a snippet from the Boston Globe in 1875. They're talking about the Harvard and Yale game of 1875, and it says the football 11 are hard at work practicing for the coming match with Yale, talking about Harvard here. Concessionary rules have been adopted, so they did come up with a set of rules before that Harvard Yale game to play by. It wasn't Harvard rules, it wasn't rugby rules, it was a little bit of both of what the schools were playing by. So we start to see a little bit more uniformity along that. A rubber ball is going to be used, so similar to today. Unusual interest seems to be taken this fall in football, so there's a lot more interest we see coming. And then in the years to come, we start to see those attendance numbers really, really go up. And then some of these rivalries, they're starting to have to be played at neutral sites. In some neutral grounds just to get some people who would otherwise not be on those college campuses to get them to some of these games. So some unusual interest seems to be taking place in the fall in football, owing probably to the series of victories which has crowned their efforts. We're talking about Harvard here. So Mr. Whiting, he's the captain of the 11 for Harvard, who recently injured his knee pretty badly. It prevented him from kicking for some days, but it gradually improved, and he will resume play on the field. I'm not sure if he played in the Harvard Yale game of 1875, but obviously we know the outcome, and that is that Harvard won before that Yale dynasty really took off. So really igniting this rivalry that continues to exist in the Ivy League today.
Is this just a question? Is this the first time that we've seen media coverage of the sport of football?
I well, we were seeing, I think that there were some articles written when we talk about like 1871 and 1872. It's just that they're few and far between to find.
Yeah.
And they're usually really short. So they're not including like quotes from players, quotes from any of the fans in attendance. Really not much. That's why it's so hard really for us to really know what was going on in some of these games. We do have that a short snippet from the New York Times in 1873, and it's between the Princeton and Yale matchup of 1873. So it talked about, it was a little bit of a recap, and it was only a paragraph, and it was in this recent football match played on the grounds of Princeton between Yale and Princeton. The latter came off victorious, winning in the first goal in 1 hour and 20 minutes, the second in 35 minutes, and the third in 16 minutes. This was the first football contest entered into by Princeton this season with any college. So the victory by Princeton that they had over Yale in 1873 was considered the more enhanced from the fact that nine of their players, including some of their best, were absent, their places having been filled by less experienced players. So not only did Princeton beat Yale in 1873, one of those early college football games, we get a short recap of it, and we realize how many players were injured for Princeton, which is nine. 9 on this short, really short, small team. I mean, we're talking about a team of like 11 or 12, potentially. So that's absolutely so impressive to me that Princeton was able to rattle off that victory back then. But we don't get many full game recaps. So anything we have, we'll take it.
Yeah, it's so interesting how it's so observatory and very short summaries of what happened. That's it, moving on.
Yeah.
And back then, if you look at the history of the United States, so much of it is newspaper heavy. The industry, that was the industry that kind of carried things when you're looking at wars of the day, just the political aspects of things. You didn't know what happened if you didn't read the newspaper. So I'm excited to see how football comes into play as a sport, as coverage and things like that start really really being adopted by New York Times, Boston Globe, things like that. And then eventually we'll see, obviously, the reporters asking questions of players, coaches, having quotes and more personalized recaps of things. So I'm excited for that as well.
Yeah, I am too. And I'm glad that you brought up the history and wars, really, too, because we're talking about the 1875 college football season. We are only about a decade removed from the end of the Civil War. So we are really early on, and we're seeing this in the Northeast, where obviously slavery wasn't existing for decades at that point, but the North just won the war. The South is still really coming back into America just in general. So we don't see college football start to develop in the South when we talk about the rivalry between North Carolina and South Carolina, which is one of the oldest rivalries, Auburn and Georgia. That'll be talked about a lot. We'll also talk about Sewanee in the 1890s, a couple different colleges in the South as the SEC begins to form. So I'm really excited to get to that point because we really are going to see the sport move over to the West and the Midwest into the Big Ten country and into the Patriot League country of Pennsylvania before it moves into the South and the coastline because those states and those colleges are still getting back integrated into the United States. So I'm excited to talk about that and how college football really is shifting the political landscape of the United States.
Yes, sir. Exciting stuff ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we got to talk about the 1875 college football season, and so glad that we're going to be continuing on this series throughout the remainder of the next couple of months. But for Jacob Vanderford, I'm Brian Partika. Thank you so much for joining us today.